The morning sun cast long shadows across the NATO training facility known as Camp Stronghold, its golden rays illuminating the dust kicked up by combat boots marching in perfect formation. Sarah Chun stood at the main gate, her single duffel bag slung over her shoulder, watching as groups of elite military personnel moved with the precision that only came from years of specialized training. At 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighing barely 130 pounds, Sarah looked more like a college student than someone who belonged among the world's most elite special operations forces. Her black hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her dark eyes took in every detail of her surroundings with a kind of quiet intensity that most people mistook for nervousness. The guard at the checkpoint barely glanced at her identification before waving her through. As she walked toward the main administration building, conversations seemed to pause wherever she went. Groups of muscular men in various military uniforms looked her up and down with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed amusement. Another desk jockey trying to play soldier. She heard one of them mutter to his companion. "Give her a week," came the reply. "These academic types never last long once the real training starts." Sarah kept walking, her face betraying nothing. She had heard it all before in different languages and different accents, but the sentiment was always the same. In a world where physical size often determined respect, she had learned long ago that the most powerful weapon was the element of surprise. The administration building buzzed with activity as various military personnel processed paperwork, received assignments, and coordinated with their respective units. Sarah approached the main desk where a stern-faced sergeant major was reviewing files with the efficiency of someone who had processed thousands of new arrivals over the years. "Name and unit," the sergeant major said without looking up from his paperwork. "Sarah Chun, assigned to the International Special Operations Assessment Program," she replied, handing over her orders. The sergeant major finally looked up, his eyebrows raising slightly as he took in her appearance. "Chun, Sarah," he repeated, scanning through his computer files. "You're listed here as coming from classified prior assignment." "That's interesting." "Yes, sir." "Well, Miss Chun, you'll be billeted in Block C, room 247. Your assessment begins tomorrow at 0500 hours. I suggest you get familiar with the layout today. This isn't the kind of place where you want to be wandering around lost." Sarah took her room assignment and building map, thanking the sergeant major before making her way toward the residential blocks. As she walked through the compound, she noticed the various training areas, obstacle courses that would challenge Olympic athletes, shooting ranges with moving targets, and complex scenarios, and combat simulation zones that looked more like movie sets than training facilities. Groups of special operations personnel were engaged in various exercises throughout the compound. Navy SEALs worked through close-quarters combat drills. British SAS members practiced explosive breaching techniques, and German KSK operators ran complex tactical scenarios. Each group moved with the fluid confidence that came from years of training and real-world experience. Sarah found Block C and made her way to the second floor. The hallway was lined with doors bearing simple room numbers, and the sound of muffled conversations and equipment being organized drifted from behind several of them. Room 247 was near the end of the hall, and she used her key card to enter a small but functional space with 2 beds, 2 desks, and a shared bathroom. Her roommate had already claimed one side of the room, evidenced by the neatly arranged German military gear and photographs of what appeared to be a special forces unit. Sarah set her bag on the unclaimed bed and began the process of settling in, hanging up her few uniforms and organizing her personal items in the provided footlocker. As she unpacked, she could hear voices in the hallway outside. A group of American Special Operations personnel was discussing the new arrivals, and their conversation carried clearly through the thin walls. "Did you see the girl they assigned to our assessment group?" one voice said with barely concealed laughter. "She looks like she belongs in a library, not on a battlefield." "Sarah something," another voice replied. "Asian girl, tiny little thing. I give her 2 days before she quits." "That's generous," a third voice chimed in. "I'm betting she doesn't make it through the first physical assessment." Some of these international assignments are just political correctness run wild. Sarah continued unpacking, her expression remaining neutral despite the conversation outside. She had learned long ago that engaging with such comments only gave them more power. Instead, she focused on preparing for what lay ahead, reviewing the training schedule that had been included with her room assignment. The assessment program was designed to evaluate special operations personnel from various NATO countries, testing their skills across multiple disciplines, including combat tactics, intelligence gathering, survival techniques, and leadership under pressure. It was intended to identify candidates for joint international operations and to foster cooperation between different military cultures. As afternoon turned to evening, Sarah made her way to the main dining facility. The large hall buzzed with conversation in multiple languages as personnel from different countries shared meals and discussed their experiences. She selected a simple meal and found an empty table in a quieter section of the hall. She had barely begun eating when a group of American Special Operations personnel approached her table. The leader of the group was a tall, broad-shouldered man with the kind of confident swagger that suggested he was used to being the center of attention. "Mind if we join you?" he asked, though he was already pulling out a chair before she could respond. "I'm Staff Sergeant Morrison, Navy SEAL. These are my teammates from Team 7. Sarah nodded politely as the four men settled around her table. "Sarah Chun," she replied simply. "So, Sarah," Morrison continued, leaning back in his chair with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "What's your background? Which unit are you coming from?" "Classified," Sarah replied, taking another bite of her meal. Morrison exchanged glances with his teammates. "Classified, huh? That's convenient. Let me guess, intelligence analyst? Logistics coordinator? Maybe communications? I'm sure we'll all learn about each other's capabilities during the assessment," Sarah said diplomatically. One of Morrison's teammates, a stocky man with a Texas accent, leaned forward. "Look, sweetheart, we're not trying to be difficult here, but this assessment isn't a game. People can get hurt if they're not properly prepared. We just want to make sure you know what you're getting into." Sarah set down her fork and looked directly at the man who had spoken. "I appreciate your concern," she said, her voice remaining calm and level. "But I'm quite aware of what I'm getting into." Morrison laughed, a sound that carried more condescension than humor. "No offense, but you don't exactly look like special operations material. I mean, what are you, maybe 120 pounds soaking wet?" 130, Sarah corrected with a slight smile. "Well, that makes all the difference," Morrison replied sarcastically. "Look, Chun, I'm sure you're very smart and very dedicated. But this isn't about intelligence reports or computer analysis. This is about real-world combat operations. Physical strength, endurance, the ability to carry a wounded teammate to safety. No disrespect, but I've seen guys twice your size wash out of programs like this." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "You're right that physical capability is important. But so is tactical thinking, adaptability, and the ability to accomplish the mission regardless of the circumstances." "Pretty words," one of the other SEALs said. "But when bullets start flying, pretty words don't keep you alive." "No," Sarah agreed, "they don't." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sarah's roommate, a tall blonde woman in German military fatigues who approached the table with the confident stride of someone comfortable in her own skin. "Guten Abend," the woman said, nodding to the group before addressing Sarah directly. "I am Hauptmann Müller, GSG 9. I believe we are roommates." Sarah stood and extended her hand. "Sarah Chun, pleased to meet you." Mueller shook her hand, and Sarah noticed the woman's grip was firm and calloused, the hands of someone who spent time handling weapons and equipment. "The pleasure is mine. I hope these gentlemen are making you feel welcome." Morrison stood as well, his demeanor shifting slightly in the presence of another experienced operator. GSG-9 was Germany's premier counterterrorism unit, and their reputation commanded respect even among American special forces. "Of course," Morrison said. "We were just discussing the upcoming assessment with Miss Chun here." Mueller's eyes flicked between Sarah and the group of SEALs, and something in her expression suggested she understood exactly what kind of discussion had been taking place. "Ah, yes. The assessment. It should be quite interesting to see how different approaches to special operations complement each other. Sarah finished her meal and stood to leave. If you'll excuse me, I'd like to review the morning briefing materials before tomorrow. As she walked away, she could hear Morrison's voice carrying across the dining hall. Money says she doesn't make it past the first week. I don't know, came Mueller's reply, with German accent adding weight to her words. Sometimes the most dangerous opponents are the ones you underestimate. Back in her room, Sarah sat at her desk reviewing the assessment schedule while Mueller organized her gear on the other side of the room. The German operator worked with practiced efficiency, checking and rechecking each piece of equipment. Those Americans, Mueller said without looking up from her work, they think they know everything about warfare. They're experienced operators, Sarah replied diplomatically. Everyone has their own perspective based on their training and experience. Mueller paused in her work and turned to face Sarah. You are very diplomatic, but I've been doing this for 12 years, and I have learned to read people. Those men, they see only what is on the surface. They think because you're small and quiet, you must be weak. Sarah smiled slightly. People often make assumptions based on appearances. Yes, they do, Mueller agreed. And sometimes those assumptions can be very costly. The two women worked in comfortable silence for the next hour, each preparing for the challenges that lay ahead. As the evening wore on, Sarah found herself thinking about the reactions she had encountered throughout the day. The dismissive glances, the condescending comments, the obvious skepticism about her presence among elite special operations personnel. She had encountered similar attitudes before in different contexts and different countries. But she had also learned that proving herself through actions rather than words was always more effective than trying to argue her qualifications. As she prepared for bed, Sarah caught her reflection in the small mirror above her sink. Tomorrow would bring the first day of assessment, and with it, the opportunity to show rather than tell what she was capable of. She thought briefly about the tattoo hidden beneath her long-sleeve shirt, a mark that represented experiences and capabilities that went far beyond what anyone at Camp Stronghold could imagine. The compound had grown quiet as evening turned to night, but Sarah could still hear the distant sounds of night training exercises and security patrols making their rounds. Somewhere in the darkness, instructors and evaluators were preparing challenges designed to test every aspect of special operations capability. As she finally settled into her narrow military cot, Sarah reflected on the irony of her situation. She had come to Camp Stronghold not to prove herself to anyone else, but to complete a mission that required her to blend in among elite operators while maintaining her cover. The skepticism and dismissal she had encountered actually worked to her advantage, allowing her to observe and assess while drawing minimal attention to herself. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of her assessment, and with it, the first opportunity to demonstrate that appearances could be very deceiving indeed. In the darkness of her room, Sarah smiled slightly as she drifted off to sleep, knowing that the greatest surprises often came from the most unexpected sources. The piercing sound of the Reveille alarm cut through the pre-dawn darkness at exactly 0430 hours, jolting the compound to life. Sarah was already awake, having developed the habit of waking naturally a few minutes before any scheduled alarm. She moved quietly through her morning routine while Mueller prepared with the methodical precision that characterized German Special Forces training. By 0450, both women were dressed in standard NATO training fatigues and making their way toward the main briefing hall. The corridors buzzed with activity as personnel from various countries converged on the central assembly point. Sarah noticed that despite the early hour, everyone moved with alertness and purpose, clear indicators that these were professional operators accustomed to irregular schedules and high-stress situations. The briefing hall was a large, utilitarian space with tiered seating facing a raised platform equipped with multiple screens and presentation equipment. As participants filed in, Sarah observed the natural groupings that formed along national lines. American Special Forces clustered together, British SAS members maintained their characteristic reserved demeanor, and smaller groups representing various other NATO countries scattered throughout the available seating. Commander Hayes entered the hall at precisely 0500 hours, his bearing immediately commanding the attention of every person present. At 45 years old, he possessed the kind of weathered confidence that only came from decades of operational experience. His service record was legendary among special operations communities. Multiple deployments across every major conflict of the past 20 years, decorations for valor that read like a catalog of the military's highest honors, and a reputation for tactical brilliance that had earned him respect from operators across all service branches. "Good morning," Hayes began, his voice carrying easily throughout the hall without need for amplification. "Welcome to the International Special Operations Assessment Program. Over the next 4 weeks, you'll be evaluated across multiple disciplines designed to test every aspect of special operations capability." He gestured to the screen behind him, which displayed a complex matrix of training modules and evaluation criteria. This assessment is not about individual glory or national superiority. It is about identifying personnel capable of functioning effectively in joint international operations where cultural understanding, tactical adaptability, and professional competence can mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Sarah studied the program outline as Hayes continued his briefing. The assessment would cover traditional special operations skills, marksmanship, close-quarters combat, survival techniques, and tactical planning, but also included modules on cultural intelligence, diplomatic protocols, and international law. It was clearly designed to evaluate operators who would be working in complex, multinational environments. "Your first evaluation begins immediately following this briefing," Hayes announced. "You will participate in a baseline physical assessment designed to establish your current capability levels across multiple fitness domains. This is not a pass-fail event, but rather a benchmark against which your progress will be measured." Morrison leaned over to whisper something to his teammate, glancing in Sarah's direction with obvious amusement. Hayes noticed the exchange and fixed Morrison with a stare that could have frozen water. "Staff Sergeant Morrison, since you seem to have something important to share, perhaps you'd like to address the entire group?" Morrison straightened immediately. "No, sir. Just reviewing the schedule, sir." "Excellent. As I was saying, the physical assessment will be followed by individual interviews with the evaluation staff. We will discuss your background, your expectation for this program, and your understanding of joint operations requirements." After the briefing, the group moved to an outdoor training area where the physical assessment stations had been prepared. Sarah counted 24 participants total, an even mix of personnel from 8 different NATO countries. The diversity of backgrounds and specialties was impressive, representing everything from counterterrorism units to maritime special operations forces. The first station tested cardiovascular endurance through a 3-mile run over varied terrain. As the group assembled at the starting line, Sarah found herself positioned between Mueller and a British SAS operative who introduced himself simply as Thompson. Morrison and his teammates clustered together a few positions down, their conversation carrying clearly in the morning air. "This should be interesting," Morrison said, stretching his hamstrings with theatrical emphasis. "I'm betting some of our international friends here are going to discover that different countries have different fitness standards." The starting signal came from an air horn, and the group spread out quickly as individual running styles and fitness levels became apparent. Morrison shot out to an early lead, his long stride eating up ground as he established himself at the front of the pack. Several other participants settled into close pursuit, including Thompson and 2 French Special Forces operators who moved with the fluid efficiency of experienced distance runners. Sarah maintained a steady, measured pace that kept her in the middle of the group. She had learned long ago that the first person to cross the finish line wasn't always the one who performed best under evaluation. Military assessments looked for consistency, tactical thinking, and the ability to maintain performance under stress, not just raw speed. As the run progressed through the compound's varied terrain, the group began to string out according to individual capabilities. Morrison maintained his lead position, but his pace was clearly taking a toll as the course moved through a section of steep hills and loose gravel. Thompson moved steadily up through the pack, his breathing controlled and his form remaining consistent despite the challenging terrain. Sarah maintained her position in the middle group, noting that several participants were already showing signs of significant fatigue. A Spanish Special Forces operator was breathing heavily and favoring his left leg, suggesting an old injury that was being aggravated by the pace. One of the American Air Force Special Tactics personnel had fallen back considerably and was now walking more than running. The final mile brought the course back through the main compound, providing an opportunity for spectators to observe the assessment. Sarah noticed that various instructors and evaluation staff were positioned at key points along the route, taking notes and timing individual performance. This wasn't just about finishing times. Every aspect of performance and behavior was being documented. Morrison crossed the finish line first, his time of 18 minutes and 30 seconds earning nods of approval from the evaluation staff. Thompson finished 12 seconds later, followed by one of the French operators and a German KSK member. Sarah finished in the middle of the pack with a time of 20 minutes and 15 seconds. Respectable, but unremarkable. As participants recovered from the run, they moved to the next assessment station, upper body strength evaluation through pull-ups, push-ups, and rope climbing. This was where the physical differences between participants became most apparent, and where Sarah expected to face the most skepticism about her capabilities. Morrison approached the pull-up bar with obvious confidence, executing 22 repetitions with textbook form before dropping to the ground with a satisfied grunt. His teammates performed similarly, their years of intensive physical training evident in their controlled movements and obvious strength. When Sarah's turn arrived, conversations around the testing area seemed to pause. Even Mueller, who had performed respectably with 15 pull-ups, watched with obvious curiosity as Sarah gripped the bar and prepared for her attempt. Sarah completed 25 pull-ups without apparent strain, her movements controlled and efficient. She could have continued, but stopping at that number served her tactical objectives better than demonstrating the full extent of her capabilities. The reactions around the testing area ranged from surprise to skeptical reassessment. Not bad for a desk jockey, Morrison muttered to his teammate, though his tone had shifted from dismissive to cautious curiosity. The push-up assessment followed a similar pattern, with Sarah performing well within the upper tier without distinguishing herself as exceptional. She was beginning to establish a pattern, competent and capable, but not remarkable enough to draw unwanted attention or detailed scrutiny. The rope climbing station presented a different challenge, requiring not just upper body strength, but also technique and coordination. The 30-foot rope hung from a steel beam, and participants were required to climb to the top and back down using only their hands and arms. Morrison attacked the rope with the same aggressive energy he had displayed on the run, powering his way to the top in just under 40 seconds. His technique was effective but inefficient, relying primarily on brute strength rather than mechanical advantage. Thompson demonstrated superior technique, using a leg-assisted method that allowed him to conserve energy while maintaining steady upward progress. When Sarah's turn came, she surprised several observers by completing the climb in 36 seconds using a technique that few of the other participants recognized. She moved up the rope using a combination of hand-over-hand progression and leg positioning that maximized efficiency while minimizing energy expenditure. "Where did you learn to climb like that?" Mueller asked as Sarah completed her descent. "Practice," Sarah replied simply, brushing chalk from her hands. The morning assessments continued through weapons handling, tactical movement, and basic medical skills evaluation. At each station, Sarah performed competently without distinguishing herself as either exceptional or deficient. She was establishing herself as a solid, reliable performer, exactly the profile she wanted to maintain. During the lunch break, participants gathered in the dining facility to refuel and discuss their initial impressions of the program. Sarah selected a table in a corner position that allowed her to observe the room while maintaining privacy for conversation. Mueller joined her, along with Thompson and a French Naval Special Forces operator named Lieutenant Dubois. The conversation flowed easily between English, French, and German as the group discussed their respective backgrounds and experiences. "The American SEAL team seems very confident," Dubois observed, glancing toward Morrison's table, where animated conversation was accompanied by gestures and laughter. Americans often are, Thompson replied diplomatically. They have extensive operational experience and excellent training facilities. Confidence is not necessarily a negative quality. True, Mueller agreed, but sometimes confidence can become arrogance, and arrogance can be dangerous in joint operations where cultural sensitivity is important. Sarah listened to the conversation while observing the dynamics throughout the dining hall. National groups tended to cluster together, but there was also some mixing and cross-cultural exchange happening. The assessment program was already serving one of its intended purposes by forcing personnel from different countries to interact and learn from each other. The afternoon brought individual interviews with the evaluation staff. Sarah was scheduled to meet with Commander Hayes himself, an assignment that could be either routine or significant, depending on his intentions. She prepared carefully for the interview, reviewing her cover story and ensuring that every detail would withstand scrutiny. Hayes' office was located in the administration building, a functional space decorated with military memorabilia from various international operations. Sarah knocked precisely at her scheduled time and entered when invited. "Miss Chun," Hayes said, gesturing toward a chair across from his desk. "Please have a seat. I've been looking forward to our conversation." Sarah settled into the offered chair, maintaining relaxed but attentive posture. Hayes opened a file folder that contained her documentation, but she noticed his attention seemed focused more on her than on the papers. "Your background information is quite interesting," Hayes began. "Classified prior assignment, specialized training credentials that are also classified, and recommendations from sources that are, well, also classified." "Yes, sir. I understand that creates some difficulty for evaluation purposes." Hayes smiled slightly. "Actually, it creates quite a lot of curiosity for evaluation purposes. In 30 years of military service, I've rarely encountered a personnel file that says so little while implying so much." Sarah maintained her neutral expression. "I'm sure my performance during the assessment will provide whatever information is needed for evaluation purposes." "I'm sure it will," Hayes agreed. "Tell me, what are your expectations for this program? What do you hope to accomplish over the next 4 weeks?" "I hope to learn from the other participants and contribute whatever skills and experience I can to the joint training exercises," Sarah replied. "International cooperation is essential for addressing modern security challenges." Hayes nodded approvingly. "A diplomatic answer. But I'm more interested in your personal perspective. What drives you? What made you pursue this kind of work?" Sarah paused thoughtfully before responding. "I believe that conflicts are won by people who understand both their enemies and their allies. Technical capabilities are important, but human understanding is what turns capabilities into successful outcomes." "Interesting perspective," Hayes said, making a note in her file. "Your physical performance this morning was solid. Nothing spectacular, but competent across all evaluated areas. Is that representative of your full capabilities?" "I always perform to the best of my ability in any given situation," Sarah replied, which was technically true while avoiding the question completely. Hayes studied her for a moment longer, his expression unreadable. "Very well. I look forward to observing your progress throughout the program. Thank you for your time, Miss Chun." As Sarah left Hayes' office, she reflected on the interview. He was clearly suspicious about her background, but that was to be expected given the classified nature of her documentation. The key was maintaining her cover while performing well enough to complete her actual mission objectives. The remainder of the afternoon was devoted to team formation and initial tactical planning exercises. Participants were divided into mixed nationality teams of 6 members each, with Sarah finding herself assigned to a group that included Morrison, Thompson, Du Bois, a Norwegian Special Forces operator named Eriksson, and an Italian carabinier named Rossi. Morrison immediately asserted himself as team leader, his confidence and experience making him a natural choice for the role. Sarah was content to accept a supporting position, as it allowed her to observe group dynamics while contributing without drawing excessive attention. "All right, people," Morrison began. "We've got 4 weeks to prove we can work together effectively. I suggest we start by sharing our specialties and experience levels so we know who to rely on for what." Thompson went first, describing his background in counterterrorism operations and his experience with hostage rescue scenarios. Du Bois discussed his maritime operations expertise and his knowledge of underwater infiltration techniques. The other team members followed suit, each describing capabilities that would contribute to overall team effectiveness. When Sarah's turn came, she kept her description deliberately general. I have experience in intelligence gathering, tactical analysis, and cross-cultural operations, she said. I'm comfortable with most standard weapons systems and communication equipment. Morrison nodded approvingly. Good. We'll need someone who can handle intelligence analysis while the rest of us focus on direct action capabilities. As the day concluded and participants returned to their quarters, Sarah reflected on her progress. She had successfully established her cover identity as a competent but unremarkable intelligence specialist, avoided drawing unwanted attention to her true capabilities, and positioned herself to observe the other participants without arousing suspicion. But she also recognized that maintaining this balance would become increasingly difficult as the training intensified and the challenges became more complex. Eventually, circumstances would arise that would force her to choose between maintaining her cover and completing her mission objectives. That evening, as she reviewed her notes and prepared for the next day's challenges, Sarah thought about the tattoo hidden beneath her sleeve and the experiences that had earned her the right to wear that mark. Soon enough, she suspected those experiences would be needed regardless of the consequences for her carefully maintained cover identity. The third day of assessment began with an unexpected announcement that would change the trajectory of the entire program. Commander Hayes stood before the assembled participants in the pre-dawn darkness, his expression more serious than it had been during previous briefings. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice carrying an edge that immediately captured everyone's attention. We have received word that this assessment will now include a live-fire exercise component that was not originally scheduled. Intelligence suggests that current global tensions require us to accelerate the evaluation timeline and increase the realism of our training scenarios. Sarah felt a subtle shift in her alertness level. Live-fire exercises meant that the assessment had moved beyond simple evaluation and into operational preparation territory. Someone, somewhere, was planning to use the graduates of this program for actual missions in the very near future. Today's exercise will test your ability to operate as integrated teams under combat conditions, Hayes continued. You will be conducting a simulated hostage rescue operation in an urban environment using live ammunition and real explosive devices. Safety protocols are paramount, but the level of realism will be higher than anything you have previously experienced in training. Morrison leaned forward in his seat, his interest clearly piqued by the announcement. Around the room, other participants displayed similar reactions, a combination of excitement, apprehension, and professional focus as they processed the implications of what they were being asked to do. Each team will be given identical intelligence packages and mission parameters, Hayes explained. Your objective is to rescue 2 high-value targets from a fortified position while neutralizing hostile forces and minimizing collateral damage. You will be evaluated on tactical execution, team coordination, adherence to rules of engagement, and mission success criteria. The briefing continued with detailed safety protocols and emergency procedures. Despite the increased realism of the exercise, extensive precautions have been implemented to prevent actual casualties. All participants would wear advanced body armor with impact sensors. Live ammunition will be used only in designated fire zones with appropriate backstops, and medical teams will be positioned throughout the exercise area. As the briefing concluded and teams dispersed to receive their mission packets, Sarah found herself analyzing the implications of the sudden change in program focus. Someone with significant authority had made a decision to accelerate this assessment and increase its operational relevance. That suggested imminent deployment requirements that went beyond standard training exercises. Morrison gathered their team in a quiet corner of the briefing hall to review their mission packet. The scenario involved a terrorist group holding 2 NATO diplomats in a 3-story building complex surrounded by urban terrain. Intelligence indicated 8 to 12 hostile personnel with small arms and possible explosive devices. Civilian populations were present in adjacent buildings, requiring careful consideration of engagement rules and tactical approaches. "All right, people," Morrison said, spreading the building schematics across the table. "This is what we trained for. Thompson, what's your assessment of the building layout?" Thompson studied the architectural drawings with a methodical approach that characterized British Special Forces planning. 3 primary entry points: main entrance, rear service door, and rooftop access via adjacent buildings. The stairwell configuration suggests that vertical movement will be channeled through predictable routes, making ambush positions likely. "Agreed," Du Bois added, pointing to specific locations on the schematic. "These corner rooms provide excellent defensive positions with overlapping fields of fire. If I were defending this building, I would position my strongest fighters here and here." Eriksson nodded thoughtfully. The Norwegian approach would be to establish overwatch positions in these taller buildings before beginning the assault. Containment and intelligence gathering before direct action. Rossi examined the surrounding terrain. "The Italian Carabinieri have extensive experience with urban operations. I recommend we consider the civilian population factor heavily in our planning. These apartment buildings will be occupied, and any firefight will create panic and unpredictable movement." Sarah listened to her teammates discuss tactical approaches while studying the intelligence packet more carefully than the others realized. Something about the scenario felt familiar, triggering memories of operational environments she had encountered during her classified assignments. The building layout, the terrain features, even the demographic information about the surrounding area all seemed to echo a real-world location she had seen before. "Chun," Morrison said, drawing her attention back to the team discussion. "What's your analysis from an intelligence perspective?" Sarah looked up from the documents, her mind quickly organizing the tactical information while maintaining her cover identity. "The timing of this scenario is significant," she said. "If we assume the hostage-takers are following standard terrorist protocols, they will expect rescue attempts between day 2 and day 4 of the operation. We're approaching their maximum stress period, which makes them more dangerous but also more likely to make tactical errors." Morrison raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "Extended siege situations create fatigue and paranoia among hostage-takers," Sarah continued. "Their initial defensive preparations will have been thorough, but maintaining alertness and discipline over multiple days is extremely difficult. They'll be expecting us, but their reaction times and decision-making will be degraded." Thompson nodded approvingly. "That's a good point. How would you recommend we exploit that advantage?" Sarah pointed to specific locations on the building schematic. "Multiple simultaneous diversions to create confusion and force rapid decision-making under stress. They'll react to threats, but if we present them with more problems than they can process effectively, their tactical coordination will break down." The team spent the next 2 hours developing their operational plan, incorporating input from each member's specialized background and experience. Sarah found herself contributing more tactical insights than she had originally intended, but the complexity of the scenario required all team members to perform at their highest capability levels. As they prepared for the exercise, Sarah noticed that her equipment loadout included several items that hadn't been standard issue during previous training days. Advanced communication systems, specialized breaching charges, and weapons configurations that were typically reserved for actual operational deployments rather than training exercises. The exercise area had been established in an abandoned industrial complex about 5 miles from the main camp. As their transport vehicle approached the staging area, Sarah could see that elaborate preparations had been made to create a realistic urban environment. Smoke generators provided atmospheric effects, speakers projected ambient city sounds, and role-playing actors had been positioned throughout the area to simulate civilian populations. "This is serious business," Mueller commented from the seat across from Sarah. The German operator was part of a different team, but all participants were being transported together to the exercise area. "I have participated in many NATO exercises, but never with this level of detail and realism. Someone wants to know what we're really capable of?" Thompson replied quietly. This goes beyond standard assessment protocols. Morrison checked his weapon one final time as their vehicle came to a stop. Whatever the reason, this is our chance to show what we can do. Everyone clear on the plan? The team confirmed their understanding of assignments and contingency procedures. Sarah performed her own equipment check, ensuring that every piece of gear was properly positioned and functional. As she secured her rifle and communication equipment, she was acutely aware of the tattoo hidden beneath her sleeve, a mark that represented capabilities she hoped she wouldn't need to reveal during this exercise. The staging area bustled with activity as all 4 teams made final preparations for their respective missions. Each team had been assigned identical scenarios, but would execute their operations simultaneously in separate but identical facility complexes. This would allow direct comparison of tactical approaches and execution effectiveness. Commander Hayes appeared at the staging area to provide final instructions. Remember that you are being evaluated not just on mission success, but on your ability to work effectively as multinational teams under pressure. Your actions today will demonstrate whether joint operations concepts can be successfully implemented in real-world scenarios. As 0 hour approached, Sarah found herself thinking about the broader implications of what they were being asked to do. The level of realism, the live-fire protocols, and the complexity of the scenario all suggested that this assessment had evolved into something much more significant than a standard training exercise. Her team moved into their assigned starting positions, occupying concealed locations around the target building complex. Through her scope, Sarah could see movement in several of the building's windows, role-playing terrorists maintaining defensive positions and conducting security patrols. Morrison's voice came through her earpiece with calm precision. All call signs, this is team leader. We're go for operation commencement in 60 seconds. Confirm status. Each team member reported ready status as final preparations were completed. Sarah settled into her assigned overwatch position on a rooftop that provided excellent observation of the target building's main entrance and eastern face. Through her rifle scope, she could see her teammates moving into their assault positions with professional competence. 30 seconds, Morrison announced. Sarah adjusted her scope's magnification and settled into shooting position. Despite the training environment, her muscle memory and tactical instincts were fully engaged. The familiar weight of a rifle, the controlled breathing techniques, and the methodical process of target acquisition all felt as natural as walking. 10 seconds. All call signs acknowledge. Thompson ready. Du Bois ready. Erickson ready. Rossi ready. Chun ready. Execute. 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 The operation began with simultaneous diversionary explosions at 2 locations designed to draw attention away from the primary assault route. Thompson and Rossi moved toward the main entrance while Du Bois and Erickson approached the rear of the building. Morrison coordinated movement from a central position that allowed him to support either assault team as circumstances developed. Sarah maintained overwatch, tracking movement patterns inside the building and calling out tactical information to her teammates. Through her scope, she could see role-playing terrorists responding to the diversions exactly as their planning had predicted, rushing toward perceived threats and abandoning carefully prepared defensive positions. Team leader, this is Overwatch. 2 tangos moving from 2nd floor east to 2nd floor north. Window exposure in 5 seconds. Copy, Overwatch. Thompson, you have targets approaching your position. The exercise unfolded with surprising realism as simulated gunfire echoed through the complex, and smoke from various effects created an authentic battlefield atmosphere. Sarah found herself automatically applying tactical skills and situational awareness techniques that went far beyond what would be expected from an intelligence specialist. When Thompson's team encountered unexpected resistance at the main entrance, Sarah didn't hesitate to provide supporting fire that eliminated 2 simulated terrorists and allowed the assault to continue. Her shooting was precise and efficient, neutralizing targets with the kind of accuracy that comes only from extensive real-world experience. Outstanding shooting, Chun, Morrison said through the communication system. Where did you learn to shoot like that? Before Sarah could respond, the exercise took an unexpected turn. One of the role-playing terrorists had apparently decided to deviate from the planned scenario script, presenting a threat situation that required immediate tactical response. A simulated explosive device was armed and positioned to cause theoretical casualties among the hostage targets. Sarah watched through her scope as the scenario rapidly developed beyond the parameters of the training exercise. The role player was either making a serious error in judgment or deliberately testing the participant's ability to handle unexpected developments. Either way, the situation required immediate action that went beyond the planned exercise protocols. Without conscious thought, Sarah shifted into operational mode. Her scope tracked the threat target with mechanical precision, her breathing controlled automatically, and her trigger finger applied pressure with the kind of muscle memory that comes from years of high-stakes operational experience. The shot was perfect, a precise engagement that would have neutralized the threat instantly in a real-world scenario. But in this training environment, it demonstrated a level of marksmanship capability that was inconsistent with her claimed background as an intelligence specialist. Jesus Christ, Chin. Morrison's voice carried a mixture of admiration and confusion. That was a hell of a shot. 600 meters, moving target, perfect center mass. The exercise continued for another 30 minutes, but Sarah knew that her cover identity had been irreparably compromised. The precision and tactical instincts she had displayed were not consistent with the background she had claimed, and professional operators like Morrison and Hayes would not fail to notice the discrepancy. As the teams regrouped after the exercise conclusion, Sarah could feel the weight of suspicious glances from her teammates and other participants. Her performance had been too good, too professional, too indicative of extensive operational experience for someone who claimed to be primarily an intelligence analyst. Commander Hayes approached their team as they were conducting post-exercise equipment checks. His expression was unreadable, but Sarah noticed that his attention seemed focused primarily on her. "Outstanding performance, all of you," Hayes said. "Miss Chun, that was exceptional shooting. May I ask where you received your marksmanship training?" Sarah looked directly at Hayes, recognizing that the moment of truth had finally arrived. The carefully maintained cover identity that had served her objectives for the past 3 days was no longer sustainable. "Various places, sir," she replied simply. "I've had the opportunity to train with different instructors over the years." Hayes nodded slowly, but his expression suggested that he knew there was much more to the story than she was revealing. "I see. Well, we'll have an opportunity to discuss your background in more detail during tomorrow's evaluation sessions." As the teams prepared to return to the main compound, Sarah realized that the next phase of her mission would require a fundamentally different approach. The element of surprise that had protected her identity was gone, and soon she would need to make decisions about how much truth she was willing to reveal to accomplish her objectives. The ride back to camp was subdued, with each participant processing the intensity and realism of what they had just experienced. But Sarah was already thinking ahead to the challenges that tomorrow would bring, and to the difficult choices she would soon be forced to make about her true identity and capabilities. The morning of day 4 brought an atmosphere of tension that was palpable throughout Camp Stronghold. Word of the exceptional performance during the live-fire exercises had spread quickly among both participants and evaluation staff, creating an undercurrent of speculation and curiosity about several team members who had exceeded expectations. Sarah woke before dawn, knowing that the careful balance she had maintained between competence and anonymity had been irrevocably disrupted. Her shooting performance and tactical decision-making during the previous day's exercise had revealed capabilities that were inconsistent with her cover identity, and she could already sense the increased scrutiny from both fellow participants and program leadership. Mueller was already awake when Sarah began her morning routine, and the German operator's expression suggested that she had been thinking about the previous day's events as well. "Your shooting yesterday," Mueller said quietly as she organized her gear. That was not the shooting of someone who analyzes intelligence reports. Sarah paused in her preparations, recognizing that direct confrontation of her cover story was now inevitable. People often have skills that aren't immediately apparent. Yes, Mueller agreed, but That level of precision under pressure comes only from extensive operational experience. Real operational experience, not training exercises. Before Sarah could respond, a knock at their door interrupted the conversation. A camp aide informed them that all participants were required to report immediately to the main briefing hall for an emergency assembly. The briefing hall buzzed with subdued conversation as participants filed in, many still processing the intensity of the previous day's exercises. Sarah noticed that the seating arrangement had been modified. Instead of the casual groupings that had characterized previous assemblies, participants were now assigned to specific seats that separated team members and national groups. Commander Hayes entered the hall accompanied by two individuals that Sarah didn't recognize. A woman in civilian clothes who carried herself with the bearing of senior intelligence personnel, and a man in naval uniform whose insignia identified him as a rear admiral. The presence of such high-ranking officials suggested that the assessment program had attracted attention at levels far above what had originally been planned. Ladies and gentlemen, Hayes began, his tone more formal than in previous briefings. I want to congratulate you on yesterday's exceptional performance. However, the exercises have also raised some questions about participant backgrounds and capabilities that require immediate clarification. Sarah felt her pulse increase slightly, though she maintained the neutral expression that had served her well throughout the assessment. Around the hall, other participants displayed various levels of curiosity and apprehension about the unexpected direction of the briefing. Yesterday's live-fire exercise was conducted under observation by intelligence personnel from multiple NATO countries. Hayes continued. Their analysis of participant performance has identified several individuals whose demonstrated capabilities suggest military backgrounds or training that may not be accurately reflected in their official documentation. The woman in civilian clothes stepped forward, her gaze sweeping across the assembled participants with the kind of analytical intensity that suggested extensive experience in personnel evaluation and threat assessment. I am Director Catherine Marsh from NATO Intelligence Division, she announced. The purpose of this assessment has evolved beyond its original training and evaluation objectives. Current global security situations require us to identify personnel with specific capabilities for immediate operational deployment. Sarah processed this information carefully. The assessment program had been converted into a recruitment operation for some kind of classified mission requiring exceptional personnel with backgrounds that might not be officially acknowledged. This suggested either a black operations requirement or a situation where plausible deniability was considered essential. Several participants demonstrated capabilities yesterday that exceed what would normally be expected based on their documented service records, Marsh continued. We are now requesting voluntary disclosure of any additional training or operational experience that might be relevant to personnel selection for specialized assignments. Morrison raised his hand. Ma'am, are we talking about classified operations? Staff Sergeant Morrison, we're talking about operations that require personnel with diverse backgrounds and specialized capabilities, Marsh replied diplomatically. Personnel who can function effectively in complex environments where traditional military approaches may not be optimal. Sarah recognized the careful language being used. This was recruitment for operations that would require individuals with intelligence backgrounds, special operations experience, or other specialized capabilities that might not be officially documented. The assessment had become a screening process for personnel who could function effectively in gray area operations. Participation in these specialized assignments is entirely voluntary, Marsh continued. However, we need accurate information about actual capabilities and experience levels to make appropriate personnel selections. We will be conducting individual interviews over the next 24 hours to discuss these matters privately. As the briefing concluded and participants dispersed to continue their scheduled training activities, Sarah realized that her situation had become significantly more complex. The voluntary nature of the disclosure process meant that she could potentially maintain her cover story, but doing so might prevent her from accomplishing her actual mission objectives. Her assigned training for the morning was advanced close-quarters combat instruction, conducted in a specially designed facility that replicated various indoor environments. As she made her way to the training area, Sarah noticed that several other participants were displaying the same thoughtful expressions that suggested they were also wrestling with questions about disclosure and operational security. The close quarters combat training was conducted by a British SAS instructor whose reputation for tactical excellence was legendary among special operations communities. Sergeant Major William Brooks had participated in virtually every major British military operation of the past 15 years, and his expertise in urban warfare and counterterrorism techniques was considered definitive. Today we're going to focus on instinctive shooting techniques in confined spaces, Brooks announced to the assembled group. The kind of skills you need when there's no time for careful aiming and precise shot placement. The training facility contained multiple rooms configured as typical indoor environments, office spaces, residential areas, and industrial settings. Participants would move through these spaces engaging pop-up targets while navigating obstacles and managing ammunition conservation. It was designed to test reflexes, tactical decision-making, and stress management under combat conditions. Sarah found herself partnered with Thompson for the exercise, a pairing that would test her ability to maintain her cover while performing effectively in advanced tactical scenarios. Thompson was an experienced operator whose own capabilities would provide a professional benchmark against which her performance would be measured. "Ready, Chun?" Thompson asked as they prepared to enter the first training scenario. "Ready," Sarah replied, checking her weapon and communication equipment one final time. The scenario began with the two operators entering what appeared to be an office building where hostile forces were holding civilian hostages. Pop-up targets would appear randomly throughout the environment, requiring instant threat assessment and appropriate response. Some targets represented hostiles that needed to be engaged, while others represented civilians who had to be protected. Sarah and Thompson moved through the facility with practice coordination, each covering sectors of responsibility while communicating position and threat information through hand signals. When the first hostile targets appeared, Sarah's response was automatic and precise, controlled pairs of shots that neutralized threats instantly while avoiding collateral damage to civilian targets. "Outstanding," Thompson murmured as they cleared the first room. "Your target acquisition speed is exceptional." As they progressed through increasingly complex scenarios, Sarah found herself operating at capability levels that were far beyond what would be expected from an intelligence specialist. Her movements were fluid and confident, her shooting was precise under pressure, and her tactical decision-making demonstrated the kind of experience that came only from actual operational deployments. By the time they completed the training exercise, Sarah knew that any pretense of being primarily an intelligence analyst had been completely destroyed. Thompson was too experienced an operator to mistake her performance for anything other than advanced special operations training and extensive real-world experience. "Chun," Thompson said quietly as they secured their weapons after the exercise, "I don't know what your actual background is, but you're not who you've been claiming to be." Sarah met his gaze directly. "What makes you say that?" 20 years of working with special operations personnel from around the world, Thompson replied. "Your movement patterns, your target engagement techniques, your tactical awareness. Those are not skills that intelligence analysts typically possess." Before Sarah could respond, Sergeant Major Brooks approached their position. His expression suggested that he had been observing their performance with particular attention. "Miss Chun," Brooks said, "a word, if you please." Sarah followed Brooks to a private office adjacent to the training facility. The space was functional and utilitarian, decorated only with photographs of various British Special Forces operations and a collection of military awards that represented decades of distinguished service. "Please, sit down," Brooks said, settling into a chair across from her. "I've been instructing close-quarters combat for 15 years, and I've worked with operators from every NATO Special Forces unit. Your performance today was exceptional. Not good for someone with limited tactical training, but exceptional by any standard." Sarah maintained her neutral expression while considering her response options. Brooks was clearly leading toward a direct challenge of her cover story, and continuing to maintain false pretenses would likely prove counterproductive. "Your weapon handling, your movement techniques, your tactical decision-making," Brooks continued, "these indicate extensive training and significant operational experience. I'm curious about where you acquired these capabilities. Various sources over the years, Sarah replied, maintaining the evasive approach that had served her throughout the assessment. Brooks smiled slightly. I've had the opportunity to train with various special operations units over the years, Sarah said carefully. Cross-training and international exchange programs provide access to different tactical approaches and techniques. Brooks nodded thoughtfully. That would explain the diversity of techniques I observed. But it doesn't explain the level of proficiency. The kind of instinctive responses you displayed today come only from extensive real-world application, not just training exercises. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a camp aide who informed Sarah that she was required to report immediately to Commander Hayes' office for her individual interview with Director Marsh. Brooks wished her luck as she left, but his expression suggested that he would be sharing his observations about her performance with the evaluation team. Commander Hayes' office had been reconfigured for the interviews, with additional chairs and recording equipment that suggested formal intelligence debriefing procedures. Director Marsh was present along with Hayes and the Rear Admiral who had been introduced during the morning briefing. Miss Chun, Marsh began, please have a seat. We appreciate your willingness to participate in this interview. Sarah settled into the offered chair, recognizing that the next few minutes would likely determine both her mission success and her future relationship with the assessment program. We've reviewed your performance over the past 4 days, and we have some questions about the discrepancy between your documented background and the demonstrated capabilities, Marsh continued. Specifically, your marksmanship skills and tactical performance indicate training and experience that significantly exceed what would be expected from someone with your official service record. The Rear Admiral leaned forward in his chair. Miss Chun, we want to be clear that we're not accusing you of providing false information or engaging in any kind of deception. However, we do need to understand your actual capabilities and background in order to make appropriate personnel assignments. Sarah considered her options carefully. Complete disclosure would compromise her mission, but might provide access to information and opportunities that would serve her ultimate objectives. Continued evasion would maintain operational security, but might result in elimination from the program. I understand your concerns, Sarah said finally. My background includes training and experience that may not be fully reflected in the documentation that was provided for this assessment. Marsh nodded encouragingly. Can you be more specific about the nature of that training and experience? Sarah took a breath, recognizing that she was about to cross a threshold from which there would be no return. I have extensive experience in special operations, intelligence collection, and direct action missions in various international environments. Hayes exchanged glances with Marsh and the Admiral. Can you provide details about the organizations or units responsible for this training? Some of that information is classified at levels that would require additional security clearances to discuss, Sarah replied. But I can confirm that my experience includes operations in Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East over the past 8 years. The room fell silent as the 3 officials processed this information. Sarah could see them reassessing everything they thought they knew about her background and capabilities. Miss Chun, Marsh said slowly, are you saying that you have been operating undercover during this assessment? Sarah met Marsh's gaze directly. I'm saying that my actual background and capabilities are different from what my official documentation suggests. The Admiral cleared his throat. This is highly irregular, but not necessarily problematic depending on the circumstances. The question is whether your presence here is authorized and whether your objectives are compatible with the program's goals. Before Sarah could respond, Commander Hayes spoke for the first time since the interview began. Miss Chun, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need a direct answer. Are you here as part of an authorized intelligence operation? Sarah recognized that the moment of complete truth had finally arrived. Yes, sir, I am. The admission hung in the air like a challenge, changing the fundamental dynamics of everything that had transpired over the past 4 days. Sarah knew that she had just irrevocably altered the course of her mission, but she also sensed that complete honesty might open doors that continued deception would have kept permanently closed. Marsh leaned back in her chair, her expression shifting from interrogation to evaluation. In that case, Miss Chun, I think it's time we discussed what your real objectives are and how they might align with what we're trying to accomplish here. The silence in Commander Hayes' office stretched for nearly 30 seconds as the three senior officials processed Sarah's admission. Outside the window, the sounds of normal camp activities continued. Training exercises, equipment movement, and the constant hum of the military facility in operation. But inside the room, the atmosphere had shifted to something far more serious and consequential. Director Marsh was the first to speak, her voice measured and professional despite the obvious surprise at Sarah's revelation. Miss Chun, if you are indeed operating under authorized intelligence cover, then we need to understand the scope and objectives of your mission. More importantly, we need to determine whether your presence here represents a security risk to this program or an opportunity for enhanced cooperation. Sarah recognized that she had reached the point where partial truth would no longer be sufficient. The careful balance between mission security and operational effectiveness had been irreversibly disrupted, and she would now need to make strategic decisions about disclosure that could affect not just her own objectives, but potentially the entire assessment program. My mission involves evaluation of international special operations capabilities and assessment of personnel who might be suitable for certain classified operations, Sarah said carefully. My presence here was authorized at levels that I'm not permitted to identify without additional clearances. Hayes leaned forward in his chair, his expression indicating that he was beginning to understand the broader implications of what Sarah was revealing. Are you saying that this entire assessment program has been under intelligence evaluation? I'm saying that certain aspects of this program and its participants are of interest to organizations that plan and execute operations requiring exceptional personnel with diverse backgrounds, Sarah replied. The Rear Admiral, who had identified himself earlier as Admiral Richardson, consulted a secure communication device before addressing Sarah directly. Miss Chun, I'm going to make a phone call that will either confirm your authorization or result in some very serious consequences for everyone in this room. Are you confident that your mission credentials will withstand that level of scrutiny? Sarah met Richardson's gaze without hesitation. Yes, sir, I am. Richardson stepped out of the office to make his call, leaving Sarah alone with Hayes and Marsh. The atmosphere in the room remained tense, but Sarah could sense that both officials were beginning to adjust their perspective from suspicion to professional curiosity about her actual background and capabilities. While we're waiting for confirmation, Marsh said, "Perhaps you could help us understand how your demonstrated capabilities relate to your mission objectives." Yesterday's performance was exceptional even by special operations standards. Sarah recognized that this was an opportunity to begin establishing credibility through selective disclosure rather than continued evasion. My training background includes multiple special operations disciplines from different countries and organizations. The assessment here provided an opportunity to evaluate international cooperation capabilities while maintaining operational cover. Hayes nodded thoughtfully. That would explain the diversity of techniques that Sergeant Major Brooks mentioned in his report. But it doesn't explain the level of proficiency. The kind of marksmanship and tactical skills you displayed suggest extensive operational experience, not just training. Before Sarah could respond, Admiral Richardson returned to the office, his expression significantly different from when he had left. Instead of suspicion and concern, his demeanor now reflected the kind of professional respect that senior military officers reserve for colleagues whose capabilities and credentials have been definitively established. Miss Chun, Richardson said as he resumed his seat, "I've just had a very interesting conversation with some people who are apparently very familiar with your work. It seems that your presence here is not only authorized, but specifically requested by organizations that I was not previously aware were involved in this assessment program." Marsh raised an eyebrow. "Admiral, are you saying that this assessment has been operating under intelligence oversight that we weren't briefed on?" "I'm saying that Miss Chin's mission here is part of a larger operational picture that extends beyond the scope of what we originally understood," Richardson replied. "And based on the conversation I just had, her evaluation of this program and its participants may be more significant than any of us realized." Sarah felt a subtle shift in the dynamics of the room. The confirmation of her authorization had transformed her from a potential security risk into a valuable asset whose assessment and recommendations could influence future operational decisions. But it had also created new complications regarding her cover identity and continued participation in the program. Given this new information, Hayes said, "How do you recommend we proceed? Your cover identity has been compromised, at least among the evaluation staff, but most of the participants still believe you're an intelligence analyst with limited tactical experience." Sarah considered the question carefully. The original mission objectives can still be accomplished, but the approach will need to be modified. Instead of covert evaluation, I can now participate at full capability levels while providing overt assessment and recommendations. Which brings us to an interesting question, Marsh said. What are your full capability levels? Because yesterday's performance was impressive, but if you've been operating undercover, we may not have seen your actual maximum capabilities. Sarah recognized that complete disclosure of her background would require revealing information that went far beyond what was necessary for the current situation. But she also understood that establishing credibility with these senior officials might open opportunities that would serve her mission objectives more effectively than continued concealment. My operational background includes assignments that required integration with various special forces units under combat conditions, Sarah said. Anti-terrorism operations, hostage rescue, intelligence collection in hostile environments, and direct action missions where conventional military approaches were not feasible. Richardson leaned back in his chair. "Miss Chun, the people I spoke with indicated that your capabilities include qualifications and experience that are extremely rare even among elite special operations personnel. They mentioned something about a designation that I wasn't familiar with, something called Ghost Hawk status." Sarah felt her pulse increase slightly at the mention of the designation that represented her most closely guarded credentials. Ghost Hawk status was awarded only to operators who had demonstrated exceptional capabilities across multiple disciplines under the most challenging operational conditions imaginable. It was a designation that fewer than 50 people worldwide had ever achieved, and its existence was known only within the most classified levels of international intelligence operations. "That designation is extremely classified," Sarah said carefully. "I'm not authorized to discuss the criteria or selection process without additional clearances." Hayes looked intrigued. "But you do hold that designation?" Sarah paused, recognizing that confirmation would fundamentally alter how these officials viewed her capabilities and potential contributions to their programs. "Yes, sir. I do." The room fell silent again as the three officials processed this revelation. Ghost Hawk designation was legendary among intelligence and special operations communities, spoken of in whispers and rumors but rarely confirmed. It represented capabilities that went beyond conventional special forces training and into realms of operational excellence that most military professionals could only imagine. "Miss Chun," Marsh said quietly, "if you hold Ghost Hawk status, then your evaluation of this program carries weight that extends far beyond normal assessment procedures. Your recommendations could influence policy decisions at the highest levels of NATO military planning." Sarah nodded, "which is why my mission here was considered sufficiently important to justify the operational security risks involved." Admiral Richardson consulted his secure device again before addressing Sarah. "I've just received instructions to provide you with full cooperation and access to any program information you require. Additionally, I'm authorized to offer you an opportunity that goes beyond your original mission parameters." Sarah waited for Richardson to continue, sensing that the conversation was about to shift in an unexpected direction. "Based on your demonstrated capabilities and the current global security situation," Richardson explained, "there is an immediate operational requirement for someone with your qualifications. A mission that would utilize your special operations background while serving strategic objectives that align with your assessment of international cooperation capabilities." "What kind of mission?" Sarah asked. Marsh opened a classified folder that had been lying on Hayes' desk throughout the interview. "A situation has developed in Eastern Europe that requires immediate intervention by personnel who can operate effectively across multiple national boundaries with minimal official support. the kind of mission that requires Ghost Hawk capabilities. Sarah studied the documents that Marsh spread across the desk. Satellite photographs, intelligence reports, and tactical assessments that painted a picture of a complex operational environment where conventional military approaches would be insufficient. It was exactly the kind of challenge that her training and experience had prepared her to handle. The mission would require you to work with a small team of international special operations personnel, Hayes explained. Personnel whose capabilities and backgrounds have been validated through programs like this assessment. Sarah realized that the assessment program had been designed not just to evaluate international cooperation capabilities, but to identify and recruit personnel for specific operational requirements. Her presence here had been part of a larger intelligence strategy that was now culminating in an actual mission deployment. Who would be on this team? She asked. Richardson smiled. Personnel whose capabilities have impressed you during this assessment. Thompson from the British SAS, Erickson from Norwegian Special Forces, and interestingly, Staff Sergeant Morrison from the Navy SEALs. Sarah considered the implications. Morrison, who had dismissed her as incompetent based on appearances, would now discover that she had been evaluating his capabilities while concealing her own far superior qualifications. The irony was not lost on her, but, more importantly, she recognized that these personnel selections had been influenced by her own assessment reports filed throughout the week. There's one more thing, Miss Chun, Marsh said, reaching into the classified folder and extracting a single photograph. This mission will require you to operate at full capability without cover identity restrictions. Your team members will need to understand exactly what kind of operator they're working with. Sarah looked at the photograph and immediately understood its significance. It showed her during a previous operation, wearing full tactical gear and displaying the distinctive tattoo that marked her Ghost Hawk status. The image captured her in professional action, bearing no resemblance to the quiet intelligence analyst persona she had maintained throughout the assessment. Your team members will be briefed on your actual background and capabilities, Hayes explained, including the significance of your Ghost Hawk designation and what it means for operational planning and execution. Sarah realized that maintaining her cover identity was no longer possible or necessary. The mission ahead would require complete transparency about her capabilities, which meant that Morrison and the others would soon learn exactly how comprehensively they had misjudged her qualifications and experience. When do we deploy? Sarah asked. Tomorrow morning, Richardson replied, which means you have approximately 18 hours to complete your assessment documentation and prepare for immediate operational deployment. As the meeting concluded and Sarah prepared to leave Hayes' office, she reflected on how dramatically her situation had changed over the past hour. The careful concealment that had characterized her first 4 days at Camp Stronghold was about to be replaced by complete operational transparency. More significantly, she was about to work alongside personnel who had dismissed and underestimated her based on superficial judgments about her capabilities. The revelation of her true qualifications would serve as a powerful demonstration of the dangers inherent in making assumptions about people based on appearances rather than actual performance. That evening, as Sarah prepared for the mission briefing where her team would learn her true identity, she allowed herself a moment of anticipation about Morrison's reaction when he discovered that the woman he had patronized as a desk jockey was actually one of the most qualified special operations personnel in the world. The Ghost Hawk tattoo, hidden beneath her sleeve, represented capabilities that went far beyond anything Morrison had encountered in his years of SEAL experience. Tomorrow, he would learn that lesson in a way he would never forget. As she prepared her gear for the mission ahead, Sarah smiled slightly at the thought of the conversations that would take place over the next 24 hours. Sometimes the most valuable lessons came from discovering that your assumptions about others revealed more about your own limitations than about theirs. The woman they had dismissed as incompetent was about to demonstrate why Ghost Hawk status was awarded only to the most exceptional operators in the world. And Staff Sergeant Morrison was about to learn that underestimating people could be a very costly mistake indeed.